If it's the last ride, you would never know.
And man, we really didn't know. Word is, Patrick Mahomes is headed to the Vikings this fall. Yeah, you heard that right. The same guy who built a dynasty in Kansas City traded. But here's the twisted part. It wasn't even a direct trade. The move rocked him so bad, insiders say he felt straight up betrayed. I've got all the details. Let's get into it. The rise and fall, how Chiefs dynasty dreams turned into trade rumors. When the confetti settled after Super Bowl licks on February 9th, 2025, something unprecedented happened in the world of professional football. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Patrick Mahomes walked off the field not as a champion, but as a defeated quarterback whose dreams of making history had been crushed by the Philadelphia Eagles in a devastating 40-22 blowout. But what's happening now? It's shaking the entire league even more. The Kansas City Chiefs, a franchise that had become synonymous with championship excellence under the magical partnership of Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes, suddenly found themselves at the center of the most explosive trade in modern NFL history. The whispers started almost immediately after that fateful night in New Orleans, where the Chiefs' bid for an unprecedented three-peat was not just denied, but absolutely demolished in a performance that left even the most ardent supporters questioning everything they thought they knew about their golden boy quarterback. To understand the magnitude of what we're dealing with here, we need to step back and examine just how far this mighty empire had fallen from grace. The Kansas City Chiefs, before this catastrophic loss, had been the epitome of sustained excellence, a dynasty that seemed destined to rewrite the record books and establish itself as the greatest football team of the modern era. Under the brilliant guidance of Andy Reid and the supernatural talents of Patrick Mahomes, they had constructed what many believed to be an unstoppable machine, one that would continue churning out championships for years to come. But Super Bowl licks changed everything. It wasn't just a loss, it was a complete and utter dismantling that exposed every weakness, every flaw, and every vulnerability that had been carefully hidden beneath the veneer of championship pedigree. Mahomes threw 2 picks in the first half. The first, a brutal read, a miscommunication that led directly to a Philadelphia touchdown. The second, sloppy mechanics, rushed, throw, and 0 separation from the receiver. This wasn't bad luck. This was a quarterback melting down under pressure. And yes, Mahomes himself knew it.
Worthy, and I try to reset back and throw it across the field to D-Hop and put it in a tight window, and he made a great play on it. And then returned it for a touchdown.
Mahomes, who had entered the game with a pristine reputation as the ultimate clutch performer, threw for just 257 yards while committing 3 devastating turnovers that essentially handed the game to Philadelphia on a silver platter. The performance was so shocking, so completely out of character for a player who had built his legend on rising to the occasion when it mattered most, that it immediately sparked conversations about whether something fundamental had changed in Kansas City. The devastation was evident in Mahomes' post-game comments.
Yeah, I mean, credit to the Eagles, man. They played better than us from start to finish. We didn't start how we wanted to. Obviously, the turnovers hurt. And I mean, I take all the blame for that.
The statistical breakdown of that fateful game reads like a horror story for Chiefs fans. In his first 11 drives, Mahomes barely completed half his passes, managed just 159 yards, turned the ball over 3 times, and watched helplessly as his team fell behind 46 before mounting any semblance of a comeback. It was the kind of performance that haunts quarterbacks for the rest of their careers, the type of game that gets replayed endlessly by critics and skeptics who always doubted whether the magic was real or just an illusion waiting to be exposed. Even some of his vocal supporters commented on how poorly he played.
It was very clear Mahomes was not going to be able to activate a gear that he always has been able to activate, and instead he was just shaky the whole time.
As Nick Wright pointed out in First Things First, this was a performance unlike anything we've ever seen from Mahomes.
It was one of the worst games of his career.
But the on-field devastation was only the beginning of Kansas City's problems. As the dust settled and the harsh reality of their failure began to sink in, a much more troubling narrative began to emerge from within the organization itself. Reports surfaced of significant tensions and negativity brewing in the Chiefs' locker room, stemming primarily from ongoing facility concerns that had been festering for years. The NFLPA report card from February 2025 painted a damning picture of an organization that had failed to address basic infrastructure needs, rating the Chiefs' locker room a dismal D- and ranking them 28th out of 32 teams in this critical category. The facility issues weren't just about aesthetics or comfort. They represented a deeper problem within the organization's commitment to its players. Nearly 2/3 of Chiefs players reported that they didn't feel they had enough room in their individual lockers, a seemingly minor complaint that actually spoke to much larger issues issues of respect and organizational priorities. When professional athletes who generate hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue for their teams can't even get adequate locker space, it sends a message about how the organization truly values its most important assets. The frustration had been building for years, with players expressing anger over unmet promises of renovations that were supposedly planned after the 2022 season. The situation became even more contentious when owner Clark Hunt denied ever promising locker room renovations, claiming it was all a misunderstanding, a response that only served to further alienate players who felt they had been deliberately misled by management. Meanwhile, as these internal issues were simmering beneath the surface, the football operations side of the organization was grappling with its own set of challenges that would soon become insurmountable. The Chiefs found themselves in an increasingly precarious salary cap situation, with only $916,317 in cap space entering the 2025 offseason, one of the tightest financial situations in the entire league. This wasn't just a minor inconvenience, it was a potential death sentence for a team trying to maintain championship-level talent across the roster. Patrick Mahomes' massive contract, with its $28,062,269 cap hit for 2025 and a staggering $94,488,045 in dead money, had become both a blessing and a curse for the organization. While it secured the services of the most talented quarterback in the game, it also created a financial straitjacket that severely limited the team's ability to address other critical needs, particularly the offensive line issues that had been brutally exposed in their Super Bowl loss. The timing couldn't have been worse for these problems to reach a boiling point. Just as the Chiefs were trying to process the emotional devastation of their Super Bowl defeat and figure out how to bounce back for another championship run, they were simultaneously dealing with facility complaints from players, a salary cap crisis that threatened to tear apart their roster, and growing questions about whether Patrick Mahomes was still the same transcendent talent who had carried them to 3 championships in 5 years. It was in this perfect storm of circumstances that the first whispers of something unthinkable began to emerge from league sources and insider networks. Could the Kansas City Chiefs, the model franchise that had seemingly perfected the art of sustained excellence, actually be considering the nuclear option of trading their franchise quarterback? The very suggestion seemed preposterous, almost insulting to suggest about an organization that had built its entire identity around the Mahomes-Reed partnership. But as more details began to leak out about the depth of the Chiefs' problems, and as rival teams started quietly making inquiries about the availability of their star players, the impossible started to seem merely improbable. The Minnesota Vikings in particular had emerged as a franchise desperately seeking a solution to their own quarterback situation, with J.J. McCarthy as their current starter, but clear questions about whether he could elevate them to championship contention. The stage was set for one of the most shocking potential transactions in sports history, a move that would send reverberations throughout the NFL and fundamentally alter the competitive landscape for years to come. Inside the Minnesota Vikings master plan, the Minnesota Vikings, a team that had long lived in the shadow of more successful franchises, were quietly orchestrating what could have been the most expensive and consequential trade in the history of professional sports. To understand the magnitude of what the Vikings were contemplating, we need to examine the financial gymnastics that would have been required to even make such a transaction feasible, with the Vikings holding just $16,400,393 in salary cap space as of May 31st, 2025, and Mahomes carrying a cap hit of over $28 million, the mathematical challenge alone was staggering. The Vikings would have needed to create an additional $11,661,876 in cap space just to accommodate Mahomes' salary, a task that would have required surgical precision in roster management and contract restructuring. The financial engineering required for such a move would have been unprecedented in its scope and complexity. Vikings general manager Kwesi Adofo-Mensah would have needed to explore every possible avenue for creating cap space, from restructuring existing contracts to potentially releasing high-priced veterans like Brian O'Neill, whose $26,019,114 cap hit represented a significant portion of their allocated funds. The domino effect of such moves would have rippled throughout their entire roster construction, forcing difficult decisions about which players to keep and which to sacrifice in pursuit of their franchise quarterback. But the salary cap maneuvering was just the beginning of the Vikings' challenges. The trade package required to pry Patrick Mahomes away from Kansas City would have dwarfed any transaction in NFL history, making previous blockbuster deals look like minor roster adjustments by comparison. Historical quarterback trades provided some context for what might have been required, but none came close to the unprecedented value that Mahomes represented as a proven champion in his prime. When the Los Angeles Rams traded for Matthew Stafford in 2021, they surrendered 2 first-round picks, a third-round pick, and quarterback Jared Goff. When the Denver Broncos acquired Russell Wilson in 2022, do, they gave up 2 first-round picks, 2 second-round picks, a 5th-round pick, and 3 players. But these deals, significant as they were, involved quarterbacks who hadn't achieved anywhere near the level of success that Mahomes had already accomplished by age 29. Speculation among NFL insiders suggested that a Mahomes trade would have required at least 3 first-round draft picks spanning multiple years, likely the Vikings' 2026, 2027, and 2028 selections, along with additional high-round picks and potentially star players from their current roster. The most realistic packages being discussed included J.J. McCarthy, their current quarterback, and 2024 first-round pick as a centerpiece, giving the Chiefs a young, cost-controlled signal caller to begin their post-Mahomes era. But even McCarthy wouldn't have been enough to satisfy Kansas City's demands. The Vikings would likely have needed to include proven stars like Justin Jefferson or Christian Darrisaw, players who represented cornerstone pieces of their own championship aspirations. The irony of trading away elite talent to acquire a quarterback who could maximize that same talent wasn't lost on Vikings fans who understood the cruel mathematics of such a transaction. The complexity of the proposed deal extended far beyond simple player exchanges and draft pick swaps. Kansas City would have faced a devastating $94,488,045 dead money hit if they traded Mahomes before June 1st, a financial burden so massive that it would have crippled their salary cap for multiple seasons. Even structuring the trade as a post-June 1st transaction would have only marginally improved the situation, spreading the dead money across 2 years but still representing an enormous sunk cost for the organization. This financial reality created a fascinating dynamic in the theoretical negotiations. The Chiefs would have needed compensation so overwhelming, so historically unprecedented, that it could justify absorbing nearly $100 million in dead money while simultaneously giving up the most talented quarterback in the game. Some analysts speculated that a fair trade package might have required 15 first-round picks, a number so absurd that it highlighted just how valuable Mahomes had become to his current organization. The Vikings' interest in such a transaction made perfect sense from a competitive standpoint. With a 14-3 record in 2024 and a roster loaded with talent, they represented one of the few teams in the league with both the motivation and the resources to attempt such an audacious move. Their defense was already championship caliber, their offensive weapons were among the best in the league, and their coaching staff had proven capable of maximizing talent across the roster. But perhaps most importantly, the Vikings understood that their current championship window was rapidly closing. Several key players were approaching the end of their prime years, and the franchise had already invested heavily in building a roster capable of competing for titles. Adding Mahomes to that foundation would have instantly transformed them from a playoff contender into the overwhelming favorite to win multiple Super Bowls. The strategic fit was undeniable. Mahomes' ability to elevate the play of his receivers would have been perfectly suited to maximizing the talents of Justin Jefferson, one of the most dynamic pass catchers in the game. His mobility and improvisational skills would have provided the perfect complement to Minnesota's offensive line, while his proven leadership and championship experience would have addressed the one missing piece in their championship puzzle. From Kansas City's perspective, the trade would have represented a calculated gamble on the future. With Andy Reid's contract running through 2029 and questions about his long-term commitment to coaching, the Chiefs might have viewed this as an opportunity to maximize Mahomes' trade value before potential instability set in. The massive haul of draft picks would have provided them with the foundation to rebuild quickly, while the salary cap relief would have allowed them to address the facility and infrastructure issues that had been causing internal discord. The timing of such a trade would have been crucial to its success. The Vikings had already begun creating salary cap space, with moves like designating Garrett Bradbury as a post-June 1st release, freeing up additional funds for a potential Mahomes acquisition. Their front office had demonstrated a willingness to make bold moves, and their ownership group possessed the financial resources necessary to absorb the massive contract obligations that would come with acquiring the game's highest-paid player. But even as the theoretical framework for such a trade began to take shape, significant obstacles remained that would have made the transaction extremely difficult to execute in practice. The Chiefs' emotional attachment to Mahomes extended far beyond his on-field contributions, encompassing his role as the face of the franchise, his connection to the Kansas City community, and his importance to the organization's long-term brand identity. Moreover, Mahomes himself had consistently expressed his desire to remain in Kansas City, viewing the organization as his football home and building deep personal relationships with teammates, coaches, and the local community. Any trade would have required his cooperation and buy-in, making it as much a personal decision as a business transaction. As the spring of 2025 progressed and the NFL draft approached, the speculation surrounding a potential Mahomes trade reached unprecedented levels. Social media platforms were flooded with mock trade scenarios, cap calculations, and passionate debates about whether such a move would represent brilliant strategic thinking or organizational malpractice of the highest order. But beneath all the noise and speculation, a much more fundamental question question was beginning to emerge. In an era where player empowerment and personal choice had become increasingly important, would Patrick Mahomes himself ever willingly agree to leave the only NFL home he had ever known? The reality check. As the dust settled on months of intense speculation and the NFL world held its collective breath waiting for the trade that would reshape professional football forever, a harsh reality began to emerge that would disappoint Vikings fans and conspiracy theorists alike. Despite all the elaborate financial calculations, the theoretical trade packages, and the breathless media coverage, the truth about Patrick Mahomes' future was far simpler and more definitive than anyone wanted to admit. He was never going anywhere. The first and most damning piece of evidence against any potential trade came directly from Mahomes himself and his response to the devastating Super Bowl loss. Rather than showing any signs of discontent or desire for a fresh start, Mahomes took full accountability for the defeat and immediately began planning for redemption. His post-game comments revealed the mindset of a competitor determined to bounce back from adversity.
Losing the Super Bowl just doesn't feel good either way. Anyway, I was proud of how my team fought this entire season with the expectations that we had on us, but we came up short, and so now it's how you respond, and hopefully that we can learn from this like we learned from the last loss that we had, and try to continue to get even better.
This wasn't the reaction of a quarterback looking for an escape route or seeking to blame his organization for the failure. Instead, it was the response of a leader who understood that setbacks are temporary, but championships are built through perseverance and collective improvement. Mahomes' history of responding to adversity provided clear evidence of his resilience and commitment to Kansas City, having previously bounced back from the Super Bowl LV loss to Tampa Bay by winning 2 more championships in the following 3 years. The financial realities that initially seemed to support trade speculation actually worked in the opposite direction when examined more closely. Mahomes' willingness to restructure his contract multiple times, most recently freeing up $21.6 million in cap space in 2024, demonstrated his commitment to helping the organization remain competitive rather than maximizing his personal earnings. This type of team-first mentality, reminiscent of Tom Brady's approach in New England, directly contradicted the narrative of a selfish superstar demanding a trade to a more lucrative situation. The Chiefs' front office, led by general manager Brett Veach, had consistently demonstrated their ability to navigate salary cap challenges while maintaining a championship-caliber roster. Their success in re-signing key players like Chris Jones, despite apparent cap constraints, proved that the organization possessed the financial flexibility and strategic acumen necessary to build around Mahomes for the long term. The temporary cap crunch that fueled trade speculation was revealed to be exactly that, temporary, as the team continued to find creative solutions to their fiscal challenges. Perhaps most importantly, the supposed locker room discord and facility issues that were allegedly driving Mahomes toward the exit turned out to be significantly overblown. While the NFLPA report card did reveal legitimate concerns about the Chiefs' facilities, these issues were administrative rather than fundamental problems with the organization's culture or commitment to winning. Andy Reid's A+ rating from players for his receptiveness to feedback and leadership qualities demonstrated that the core relationship driving the Chiefs' success remained as strong as ever. The timing of Mahomes' OTA participation and leadership activities in the spring of 2025 provided perhaps the clearest indication of his intentions. Rather than distancing himself from the organization or going through the motions, Mahomes threw himself into the process of integrating new teammates and preparing for another championship run. His comments about building relationships with new players and his visible enthusiasm during voluntary workouts painted the picture of a quarterback fully invested in Kansas City's future success. Teammate Charles Omenahu's description of Mahomes being on a revenge tour following the Super Bowl loss captured the true sentiment within the organization. This wasn't a team dealing with internal strife or a franchise quarterback looking for greener pastures. Instead, it was a championship organization using disappointment as fuel for another title run, with Mahomes leading the charge toward redemption. The Minnesota Vikings' theoretical interest in Mahomes, while understandable from a competitive standpoint, was always more fantasy than reality. The financial gymnastics required to make such a trade work would have gutted their roster and mortgaged their future for multiple decades. Even if they had somehow managed to create the necessary cap space and assemble a historically unprecedented trade package, the deal would have left them with Mahomes, but without the supporting cast necessary to maximize his talents. More fundamentally, the Vikings' pursuit of Mahomes represented a misunderstanding of what makes championship teams successful in the modern NFL. While quarterback play is undeniably crucial, sustainable excellence requires organizational stability, coaching continuity, and roster depth across all positions. position groups. Trading away multiple years of first-round picks and proven stars for one player, regardless of his talent level, would have violated these principles and likely resulted in short-term success, followed by long-term mediocrity. The Chiefs, by contrast, had built their dynasty on exactly the opposite approach. Their partnership between Mahomes and Andy Reid represented the type of organizational synergy that couldn't be replicated through simple player acquisition. The trust, communication, and shared vision that had developed over 7 years together was worth more than any trade package could provide, creating a competitive advantage that extended far beyond individual talent. The broader context of Mahomes' career trajectory also argued strongly against any potential trade. At 29 years old, with 3 Super Bowl victories already on his resume, he was positioned to challenge Tom Brady's legacy as the greatest quarterback of all time. Achieving that goal would require sustained excellence over multiple seasons, something that was far more likely to happen in the stable, familiar environment of Kansas City than in a new organization where he would need to rebuild relationships and adapt to different systems. The Chiefs' commitment to maintaining their championship window was evident in their recent roster moves, including drafting Xavier Worthy to address their receiver needs and making strategic additions to bolster their offensive line. These weren't the actions of an organization preparing to tear down and rebuild. They were the moves of a team determined to maximize their remaining years with a generational talent at quarterback. Perhaps most tellingly, absolutely no credible reports ever emerged suggesting that Mahomes himself had any interest in leaving Kansas City. Throughout months of speculation and rumor mongering, not a single legitimate source reported any discontent from Mahomes or his representatives. His agent never made public statements about exploring options. No cryptic social media posts appeared, and no mysterious absences from team activities occurred. The silence was deafening and definitive. The entire saga served as a fascinating case study in how modern sports media and fan speculation can create narratives that exist completely independently of reality. Social media posts and theoretical trade scenarios generated millions of views and endless debate, but they were ultimately based on wishful thinking rather than factual reporting. The algorithms that drive engagement rewarded sensational speculation over boring reality, creating an echo chamber where increasingly outlandish trade proposals gained credibility through repetition rather than sourcing. As the 2025 season approached and the Chiefs began preparing for another championship run, the Mahomes trade rumors faded into the background where they belonged. The quarterback who had transformed Kansas City from playoff contender to dynasty remained exactly where he had always planned to be, leading the Chiefs' pursuit of more championships and cementing his legacy as one of the greatest players in NFL history. The Minnesota Vikings, meanwhile, continued their search for a franchise quarterback through more traditional means, focusing on developing J.J. McCarthy and building a roster capable of sustained success. Their brief flirtation with the impossible dream of acquiring Mahomes served as a reminder that in professional sports, the most exciting possibilities are often the least realistic ones. In the end, the great Patrick Mahomes trade saga of 2025 taught us more about the power of speculation and the hunger for blockbuster transactions than it did about the actual intentions of the players and organizations involved. Mahomes remained in Kansas City not because no one wanted him, but because everyone understood that some partnerships are too valuable to break apart, some legacies are too important to interrupt, and some dreams are simply too unrealistic to pursue. If you enjoyed this video, check out our other awesome videos on the channel. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.